for Annie Lighthart to be here to read from her new book, Pax, and I was trying to think, you've been a guest at our poetry night before, and I was gonna look at 5 years ago. So, on your near 5 year anniversary, welcome back.
Such a joy to be back here. It was 5 long years ago. And so much has happened since then that as I was driving here, I was just blinking my eyes in wonder and relief to be back in person with people and poets and words. So thank you, Courtney, and the library, and all of you for coming. Before I started, I just wanted to say, to be in a library is one of my favorite things, my top favorite things. And when I was a child, the library was my best safe place because libraries were places that a shy kid could find everything you needed. You know, there were hidden corners and big books and quiet spaces and adults who were encouraging you to read instead of shoving you outside to play dodgeball or something like that. And I felt like the library was a place with rules I understood. You know, be quiet, I could do that. Put books back and read. Those were all things that I was capable of doing. And when I found, as I grew up, that I found Jorge Luis Borges, the great Argentine novelist and librarian also, and he imagined that libraries were a kind of paradise. And I totally agree. So I brought poems tonight to honor this type of paradise. I brought poems about writing and books and poetry, which were all my loves at the library. So I thought I would start off with a love poem to a library. And it's called Library Summer. It had the silence of a ship at anchor, wood resting from wind, Spanish whispers of studying girls, thin heat rising. Looking for a book, I could be lulled into any row and lost, set adrift by the call of the number-tuned bindings climbing their faraway scale. And I could never be sure if looking out, I might see flocks of books escaping, a few setting off for the city, the rest contemplating the evening from the green pages of trees. And I brought two poems specifically about books and writing, and I want to dedicate them to any of you who are going to read tonight, or even if you're not going to read tonight, dedicate them to you. It's really lovely to have good company. This first one started when I heard a little bit of biographical information about Ralph Ellison, the novelist. I heard that he took a typewriter into a barn in Vermont and sat down and just started writing The Invisible Man, just like that. And so I tried really hard to picture myself sitting in a big barn writing a novel. But all I could picture myself was sitting in a small, leaky boat writing poetry. That's what I got. And the bad news is that the leaky boat is often what writing really feels like on some days. But the good news is that I discovered there's really beautiful consolation in that boat. So this poem is called Portable Typewriter on a Small Leaky Boat. And it's for all writers trying to stay afloat. This is the way I live, and maybe you too, if you are compelled to write about the water and the overhanging trees, if you keep writing sentences while the shore goes by. Though no one is reading them, I write even more lines, and maybe you too, switching the punctuation around purposefully like small fish among stones. And maybe you trail your hand behind the boat sometimes and then write about it, while the actual hand, bless you, drips and finally dries on the keys. Is this an inexplicable life? The people on the shore live so differently, yet have an old, familiar look. They are waving flags at us, or maybe pages. We can't know, you and I, because the river moves faster, even as we write it. And besides, we have only one oar. My husband said, I read that and he heard people laughing and he said, I don't get that line. He's a city boy. And I said, that's okay, I don't want you to know. Apart from evenings like this, being a writer is often a lonely thing. But as a reader, I have never felt alone. When I was little, I found such good company in books that I couldn't believe it. I remember faking sick in high school to read the end of Pride and Prejudice to see if Elizabeth got together with Darcy. I put the thermometer up to the light bulb, and my mother was like, 104? And I was like, I'm really sick. And I loved any book, with the one exception of the books that I never quite finished. And I feel like there's always a few important books that sort of lurk around the house and wait for you to finish them. I know there's definitely some short books that I haven't finished, but it's the big, long ones that feel oppressive. So this next poem is a guilty admission. And if there's a book you have never quite finished, you will know what I mean. The poem's called Serious Literature, and I'd like to dedicate it to Tiempo, who is my first four-legged poetry companion, right in the back row there. And it's okay if he's sleeping. Sometimes that happens at poetry readings. Serious Literature. The book I have never finished reading knows I avoid it. I watch it uneasily. It likes to nudge its fat spine to the edge of the shelf, likes to consider a fall in which it would land like a cat, if a cat were a book, which is to say, easily and open to just the right page, which is the page near the end I have never quite reached, the one that will make my eyes into canyons, the one that will make my mouth break from my mind, so that silently I will doubt all other truths and live differently. And if not that, then at least live happily, stunned as I will be by the buoyancy of time inside the stern covers and the light pouring out on my face looking in. I was just overflowing with joy when I got the email from Courtney that this was still going on. And part of the joy is being able to admit in public openly that I'm a poet, because I found this is not always accepted in the greater world, and it has very definite disadvantages. People say, oh, what do you do? And I say, I'm a writer. Like, that's gonna hide being a poet. And then they say, oh, what kind of writing? And then I say, poetry. And then they kind of glaze. And they automatically think that you're a little sensitive and a little bit strange, and that you mostly wear black, which I try to, not do when I'm out in public. And I found they kind of get nervous around you, like you're some kind of grammar cop. And they start saying, oh, I should have used a semicolon in that sentence. And I'm like, it's okay. But one of the beautiful things about loving poetry is that sometimes a poem finds you. And it's just the right poem at the right place, and you feel like that poem has been seeking you out all your life to give you something. And it could be comfort or wisdom or friendship or a laugh. And so I have this feeling that sometimes a poem is just kind of waiting to find you. And so this is a poem of poetry gratitude. And it's called A Poem Comes Looking for You. A poem comes looking for you out of a darkness beyond your own. A poem comes looking for you because it saw you standing in a deep, bare garden. Because you were afraid. Because you did or did not speak. Because the sun was on your face. Because you were surprised at growing old. It is, in the end, an uncomplicated love. A poem comes looking for you. A poem comes late or early in the day because you are a poor fisherman empty by the river. A poem will reel itself toward you. Who is the fisher and who is the fish? One of you has a gold coin in its mouth and is purring at the end of the line. I spend a lot of time, probably too much time, trying to figure out what poetry is and what poetry can do. I've been writing it for a number of years now, and I still don't exactly know. But I think what I've finally sort of hanging on to is that poetry can be this small but really beautiful bell that wakes us up to our lives, to those things that we just can't catch or can't quite see or don't stop for in our daily lives. I know that for myself, life is usually coming at me so fast. It's just all I can do to handle it, put out the fires, have dinner, and go to bed. But poetry has the power to stop me for a little while, and to keep reminding me about the deeper and the more invisible things that are just as important that are going on. Because I grew up in a quiet family, and because I was, they will tell you, the most chatty, inquisitive, and relentlessly talking person in the house, when I found poetry, I was amazed because this was a world of people who were talking. And they were talking about what mattered to them, like the soul and death and beauty and love and how to live. When I found poets like Whitman and Rilke, I just thought I died and gone to heaven. Like, these were like real brothers who wanted to tell me the truth about the world as close as they could come to it. And I suddenly felt so much less alone. And it has kept me reading all these years. I've never gotten over the amazement of it. So this is a poem about those depths. And it's called The Second Music. Now I understand that there are two melodies playing. One below the other, one easier to hear, the other lower, steady, perhaps more faithful for being less heard, yet always present. When all other things seem lively and real, this one fades. Yet the notes of it touch as gently as fingertips, as the sound of the names laid over each child at birth. I want to stay in that music without striving or cover. If the truth of our lives is what it is playing, the telling is so soft that this mortal time, this irrevocable change, becomes beautiful. I stop and stop again to hear the second music. I hear the children in the yard, a train, then birds. All this is in it and will be gone. I set my ear to it as I would to a heart. This is a poem that's completely different, as Monty Python would say. Just in case you think I get really deep, I have to admit I'm a sucker for magazine articles that title things like 20 Ways to Look Instantly Younger or like 14 Ways to a Happier You. So I found one finally that was titled Top 10 Ways to Get Rid of Anxiety. And I thought, this is it. And I started reading it. But the number one recommendation was avoid excessive rumination. And I just thought, like, I can't do that. As a poet, that's what I do. I was born to excessively ruminate. So I stopped reading the article, and I have no idea what the other 9 things were. But the phrase excessive rumination just completely dug into my mind, and I walked around for days saying it. Excessive rumination, excessive rumination. And finally, to get rid of it, I wrote this poem, which is called, unsurprisingly, Excessive Rumination. Yes, while walking. Yes, while bathing. Yes, while eating. Surely, while asleep. Yes, while driving or reading. Yes, just like a cow with its huge cud, like that, the long chew of thought, that work of the laborious muscular tongue. And my God, the 4 stomachs lugged within me. One, a leathery bag of rationalization. The second, a sour, introspective pouch. The fretful third, a chafing repetition of the first. And the fourth, just a haversack of stew. Miles of digestive plain, tubes of deliberation, the long, dark tunnels of brood. Whole days of it here, heavy in the chair. Weeks by the window, pen in hand. Yes, like a cow with the same dumb belch, an occasional poem rolling between the teeth, traveling around, thick and green. I grew up in central New York in cow country, and cows just keep coming back. Yes. Yes.
I grew up in farms too, so I was like, she had to have grown up around cows.
Cows like come into my poems a lot. I can't keep them out.
Spotted relevance.
Yes. Thank you. I forgot to bring my book, but I wanted to tell you, a few years ago, I saw a painting, and it glowed. It was this tiny painting. It was this big, and it was the painting of a child, and it had this like gold luster above her, and it was titled, such an intriguing title. It was called Patron Saint of Turning Down the News. And I thought, I need that. And I didn't know then that I would end up meeting the artist and that she would give me permission to put it on my book. And the book is called Pax. And it's like hidden. I was too afraid to call it Peace, because that just seemed really too bold. like a little book couldn't work on that. So I hid it in the Latin. And this little painting has really stayed with me. I didn't at the time know how desperately I would come to need to be reminded to turn down the news every now and again. But this is a poem about doing just that. And it turns out that when you turn it down just a little bit, every once in a while, you can step into happiness. The poem's called In the Middle of Human Invention. In the middle of human invention, I took my sorry head out of its kingdom of news and went into the sun that was the chief of all elements. I walked warm and unthinking through every green field. Fed as if with good bread and wine, the hours followed and shouted. We were a long, ridiculous, happy parade. For once, my warring city-states slept. For once, the workaday world lived beyond prediction. The sun pressed its warm thumb on the earth, while I pulled my mind behind me like a red wagon, and lived a whole day without lie or desire. I've brought just a couple more poems. The first two are about seeing, which is ironic. I'm incredibly nearsighted, but it's seeing far is like one of my favorite things to write about. And this first poem is called Fluency. And I always thought being nearsighted, and my glasses are getting thicker and thicker as I get older, was really a disadvantage. Even more so because I have resisted getting bifocals. So I'm kind of guessing some of the words I'm reading here, even though I put it in 14 font. But one day, I looked out the window, and I thought I saw a face among the flowers in the garden. And it turned out that being nearsighted was a really lovely disadvantage to have, because nothing is quite what it seems. So this is called Fluency. And it's one long sentence, and I always feel like I have to take a really deep breath, like I'm going to make it through on one breath. Fluency. The face among the flowers was not a face, but a flower that blurred the edge of comprehension until everything became a face. Everything had eyes. Everything had a mind with secret thoughts inside. And so the barn, with its smudged windows, stood aware of impatience and time. And the trowel, with its small head in the dirt, plotted how not to be found. And the old dog, who of course had her own old gray face, came to have another one, and shifted and sighed on her rug while thinking about philosophy and the stillness of God. And then the depths of the afternoons she had passed alone crossed into my heart. And the ants climbing the table stopped and looked up. And I fell away blind into a softer knowing, as if into the flowers who took me as one of their own. And this next poem is specifically about seeing with binoculars. It's really a poem of hope for anyone like me who has never been able to manage binoculars, which seems like a simple invention, but I get kind of desperate while using them. And I've had this lifetime of trying and failing to see birds with binoculars. I usually just get only this blur, but once I got a poem, which was a really good deal. And it's very truthful. It's called Binoculars After All These Years. Of twiddling and sighing, of foggy unfocusedness, of bouts with them pressed awkwardly like elbows in my eyes, lugging them, wronged by them on mountains and oceans, blurry infuriation, clumsy contraptions, red raccoons left by them inexplicably long on my skin. But now, a sudden, unexpected tunneling to sight. Bird on a fence post far across the yard. Bird seen singing. Seen looking assiduously around. Tiny bird with 3 green feathers sticking up out of place. Even the spot of sun on its beak in almost ridiculous clarity. My 2 eyes blinking at it while weeping as one, as if coming home undeserved after all of these years, nearsighted and prodigal, yet welcomed and feasted, placed at table among the small honored guests whose wing beats stir the invisible air. And for our last poem, it's a poem called Blessing. It took me 10 years to write it, which I say with both dismay and relief. It's a really, really tiny poem. It's just 6 small lines. And I wrote the first 4 10 years ago and got stumped. I memorized them because I really wanted to finish it. It felt important, but I had no idea what it wanted to say. And I would just say them in my mind every now and again, hoping to find a way forward. And then this last fall, out in the sun, the last 2 lines just popped into my head. And I'm so grateful for them, and I'm so grateful to give them to you. Thank you for having me. Blessing. All afternoon by the window, sunlight, that great soft hand on my head. I could hardly move. And the sun spoke. It said, "There now. Maybe your heart is bigger and wiser than you think." Afternoon slowly rolled into evening. I will speak with that voice all the days of my life. Thank you so much.